Yeah, we're good.
Piyush, I'll hand over to you.
All right. Can we switch to the PowerPoint now, or is that? Great. It was not YouTube, it was Google. That was the question. All right, perfect. Okay, so I'll give you a quick intro to Ideas 42, and then I want to talk about this idea of innovation and how behavioral science and testing fit into that. I've interspersed various examples, ours and other people's from international development work as well. But please stop me and ask questions anytime. I don't want to just make this one monolithic lecture. So in a nutshell, Ideas 42 applies behavioral science for social good. That's our mission. So we do that by designing intervention solutions and implementing them in the field. Lots of different partners, anything from private sector to foundations to government. You see the White House logo there. So my colleagues had the pleasure of working with Lori. They set up the SBSD over the years and did a whole bunch of projects. We have a nudge unit in New York City in the mayor's office, one in Chicago in the mayor's office. So those are been operating for some time. Are great. And we work across a lot of different domains. International is a big one for us. It's probably half, if not more, of our work at this point. This map keeps changing. It's probably already outdated, but it gives you a sense for we're working across the world in lots of different countries. So we don't have offices in all these places. We have some staff in a couple of countries where we have lots of projects, but we work from here remotely with local partners. So I think the latest count was about 32 countries that we have projects in at the moment. Okay. So this is what I want to spend some time on. And it looks like the window washers will get to. So is innovation an art or is it a science? To what extent is it just about creativity and having that flash of insight, or is it something else? Is that creativity and flash of insight that we think of, is that replicable somehow? And the argument I will make is that it's actually almost never a flash of insight. So I went and researched a whole bunch of different innovations, and it turns out that it's never somebody waking up one day with a brilliant idea that they implemented and it just works. So I couldn't find a single story like that. So a good one is on the airplane, right? This thing went through years and years of innovation that other people were doing, right? So the principle, the physics principle behind which underlies the wing design that dates back 100+ years from when the Wright brothers built this. They tested 200 different wing designs. Somebody else had already developed an engine they could use. From their work on bicycles, they knew a lot about wood and how materials behave and so on. There's another guy, Otto Lilienthal, who died in the process of testing aircraft, who had been working on gliders for several years. So it took a lot of iteration to get to an airplane that worked. And they didn't just test the entire airplane. They were testing components of it, in pieces beforehand. So these are different aerofoil designs, and this is the actual wind tunnel that they used to test wing designs. And they tested on 200 wing designs before they got it right. That is what it took to get to that airplane over years and years of work. And if you look at most everyday things, from simple things like aluminum cans to paper clips to most complex like a Dyson vacuum cleaner, all of these things have a story like this. There are hundreds of patents for paper clips over the years, believe it or not. Different designs, the machines to make them. Same with aluminum cans. The hard part with aluminum cans was design failure of the little cap, right, to get that exactly right and so on. Dyson went through them 5,126 failed designs. before he figured out how to make the thing work. And even that idea for the, forgetting the term for it, for his dust and air separator came from seeing an industrial version. He was driving by a factory, saw this giant thing, and said, oh, maybe I can miniaturize this. And then it took him over 5,000 iterations. So that's what all of this innovation takes. Right, so this is more like invention or engineering. Or this is from Back to the Future. You think of the mad scientist in the basement with lots of devices and pipes and wires and whatnot. That is more what innovation is like for physical products. But we're now trying to do this for things that are often not physical. It's some kind of experience or process that people are going through. And our outcome is not a device that works. Our outcome is some change in behavior. So this all gets significantly more complicated all of a sudden. It's not like I can just build a device and keep testing it in the lab. I have to now go out in the field and see what it's doing. So think about the last time you were cooking up anything new. You know, a new product, a new program, maybe you were just changing something simple. In your program, maybe you were designing an email campaign you were going to send out, or a letter. You know, how did you do it? How did you develop it? Did you test it at all? How did you know it was working? Like, how many people here have done this type of post-it brainstorming session at some point in their career? Like most. Have others done brainstorming in a meeting for an hour with no post-it structure, nothing, just people throwing out ideas? How many people have done that? Yeah. Like, were you a little bit uncomfortable at the end of that before implementing one of these ideas? Maybe it won't work. Right, or did you feel pretty confident in the brainstorming? Right? It's a bit like this. So the way most people do innovation is gambling. I mean, it's a huge risk. It might put billions of dollars sometimes if you're the US government behind something that somebody cooked up in a boardroom. And they may not have even used a design thinking process, let alone anything scientific or involving testing. So if you go back to the example of the Wright brothers and technology and engineering and invention, there are two things that we see are big differences between this creative design process and that. One is that it builds on a whole bunch of science. Right? So most of the electronic devices we have today build on components that people have invented and developed over the years and improved on. There are scientific theories, formulas, tools that tell us how much load a particular piece of metal is going to take if you're designing a bridge, etc. There's a whole bunch of science. And then the second is a whole bunch of testing. So the first design never works. So these are the two main components, right, that are different. Now, in the human design world, this was hard to do. We didn't really have the science, and we didn't have a good way of testing until relatively recently. Now, what's equivalent to engineering science is the behavioral science. Right? So this tells us how people react to particular situations, how they interact with a particular system. So if you're looking at any institution, system that you're looking to change, there's always human interfaces. Not just to the beneficiary, but to the staff that's working in that system and so on. This science is telling us how exactly people will react to different ways of designing those interfaces. Right? So that's the science that we now have, and there's more and more coming out as you guys all go out and do innovation. We do innovation projects with other partners, and various other people are doing this around the world. The more we know, like, oh yeah, if you write the letter this way, this is what happens. If you write the letter that way, this other thing happens. And then the second part is on testing, and there the testing is randomized controlled trials, and we have all the technology and science behind that now. So first I'm going to focus on the behavioral science part and give you a quick overview of that, and then I'll come back to testing. But before I do that, that was kind of a new framework. So does anybody have any questions? Does this sound completely idiotic to anyone? Raise your hand and say, let me eat my lunch in peace. No. All right, so I'll keep plugging along. So why do we need behavioral science? If we have good intuition about people, we are all people ourselves, we're desirers, we know, how we all behave. We can interview people, we can look at data. So why is that not enough? And then that is what I'm going to try to convince you in this section, that it's not enough. But first, since you guys had no questions, and I kind of anticipated this, I brought a test. Make sure you're awake after your lunch. And it's very simple, so don't worry. You guys are smart, you'll figure it out. So all you have to do is call out the color of the shape that I put on the screen. Right, so for this, we would all call out black. Great. Okay, so I'm going to go quickly, right? Okay, go.
Yellow.
Green.
Red.
So that last one took a little bit longer. Right? You had to pause and think. And that's because your brain, most of the time, is operating very, very unconsciously and automatically. So you read the word before you realize, oh wait, that wasn't the task, and your more deliberative side of the brain had to kick in and correct. And then you guys are particularly good executive function, it seems, because in most places that I do this, at least half the room calls out blue and then snickers and then corrects themselves. You guys quietly corrected yourselves. That's pretty good. That's great. So what is the implication of this? The implication of this is often there's all these unconscious influences on our behavior that we don't realize are happening. Right? And that is the reason why there's all this behavioral science that tells us how people react to things, because it's all very unintuitive and we don't know exactly just by guessing, because often our own processes are not conscious. So one of the main kind of fundamental insights about this is how much of behavior is driven by who we are versus what's going on in the situation. And because our brain is acting so unconsciously and quickly all the time, the situation turns out to have a massive effect on behavior. And this is very unintuitive. Right? When you see somebody doing something, you want to think it's because they grew up here, or their background is this, or they come from that country or this culture. Right? But often their behavior is being driven by something in the context. So this is a great example of it. In this study, the subjects were seminary school students, who's people studying to be priests, religious leaders, were studying religion. They were asked to prepare a sermon on the parable of the Good Samaritan. Right? And they were told they have to walk across campus to deliver that sermon. So they're thinking about just being helpful. And they're seminary students, okay? What happens along the way while they're walking is they encounter somebody crouched over who's well-dressed, who looks like it's in some kind of medical distress. Right? The RAs are hiding in the bushes, just counting how many people stop to help. Right? So if you ever want to have fun, you go be a psychology RA. You get to do all sorts of fun stuff. Now, the twist was half of these people were told that they're running late. And the other half were not told anything. What do you think? How many people do you think would stop if they're not in a hurry?
It's a percentage.
Yeah.
Depends where New York.
This was somewhere. Yeah, this was a Northeastern university, so not New York City, university campus, pretty international.
20% stopped.
Yeah, that's because I set you up, come on. Okay.
They're not in a hurry, 70%.
That's actually very close. So 63. And then when they're in a hurry, it shouldn't change, right? It really shouldn't. Like, given what we know about these people, they should all be stopping, but it drops to 10.
Oh, wow.
Which is remarkable. And just from telling somebody, oh, you're running late. So this is a key of insight that drives a lot of things. The situation matters a lot. Was there questions? Or
Just a comment, I believe it's because you are less prudent when you are under pressure.
Yeah.
Because the 10% thought it could be a trap. Somebody is watching me from behind and this is just, they are going to stop me, or simply, well, poor guy, I don't know how I can help him.
Yeah, you justify,
Yes.
oh, I have to do this other thing, I can't do it. Chances are a lot of those people didn't even see the guy because they were so focused on going into the room. So our attention gets focused very, very fast, which is helpful in 90% of the cases, but 10% of the time it messes us up because we miss things. So on the way up here, we forgot Jana. We got in the elevator, we got upstairs, we're like, oh, where's Jana? We were so focused on fitting in there. We were running late actually a little bit. So it happens all the time. Okay, so what about qualitative research and interviewing people, just asking them what their preferences and needs are? Why is that not enough? There are several insights from the research that can show you how people often are not aware of why they do things, what they want, how they did something. Right, this is a fun little example. It dates back all the way to 1931. I'm showing you really hot off the presses research here. So what happens here is the subjects come into the room. There are two ropes hanging from the ceiling. They're too far to reach for anybody. And their task is to tie the two ropes together. Okay, so they struggle with it for a while, like most people don't get it. Along the way, the experimenter casually walks by and bumps one of the ropes, so it starts swinging. And immediately, most people solve the puzzle by tying something heavy to the rope, swinging it like a pendulum, holding one, waiting for it to swing over, catch it, tie. It's simple. Now the real experiment starts. The experimenter asks people, how did you solve this puzzle? Most people will say, oh, it just came to me. And some people have elaborate stories, like, there was this grandfather clock in the house I grew up and I thought of the pendulum. But really what happened was the experimenter gave them a little subtle hint. Right? So often we're not really aware of why we're doing things, what our attitudes are acting very, very unconsciously. Now, there are lots of other things like this when you ask people things. So social desirability, often people will answer questions based on what they think the right answer is. So in voting surveys, there's consistently about 25% over-reporting if you ask people, did you vote? But if you add a little prompt on the survey saying something like, many people don't get around to it because something comes up at the last minute, all the over-reporting goes away. Very simple design. Right? Cognitive dissonance, again, a fancy term for something that just means that your brain doesn't like conflicting beliefs. So classic experiment here is people who are paid less than others to do some tedious task report liking that task more. Because their brain can't make sense of the fact that, oh my God, I did this horrible tedious thing and I got paid like $2. Right? So you guys are really going to enjoy, you're going to love this experiment that Ben did on you because you got nothing for it.
You'll point it out.
Like over the next few days, your brain will change your beliefs. Like that was the best experiment ever. And then there are lots of cognitive biases in survey research. So in this particular study, if you ask people how happy they are, and then you ask them about their dating life, and this was done with college students, so this really matters. The correlation is about 16%, but if you ask them how their dating life is, then ask them how happy they are, the correlation goes to 55%.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I don't understand why if I'm paid less, I'm going to enjoy more something less.
So your brain actually changes its beliefs about how much you enjoyed that task. Because you're trying to reconcile, why did I do that task if I got paid very little for it relative to these other people who got paid more? And either, so it can't change the fact that you got paid less, right? So it just changes, your brain changes the belief that, oh, I probably enjoyed it. So it was worth it in and of itself. It wasn't for the money, I did it because I enjoyed the task. Yeah.
So yeah, cognitive dissonance really means you have a belief, but you act differently, and we can use this to our benefit. If you have somebody who doesn't believe in climate change, try convincing that person will be difficult. But designing an intervention where the person consumes less electricity saves water, not because we say it's the right thing for the climate, but it saves you money, or your neighbor consumes already less than you, be a bit more competitive, can lead to a number of behaviors that are suddenly not anymore in sync with the belief of that person. And it's not a given that then the person, will be more environmental friendly from his values, but it is an opportunity. Very often in the UN, we design interventions and we want to change attitudes. That might not be wrong, but it can be also the right thing to not target the attitude, but concrete behaviors, and they then can shift attitudes, because we want to avoid cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, the flip side is, like, often if you pay people to do something that's good for society, they start doing less of it, because they'd rather do that thing just because it's good for society, not because they got paid. So there are all these funny effects. All right, so other implications of all of this research is that we can start designing once we know how people react to these features of the situation and the context. So this example is from some work done by Dilip Soman at University of Toronto, and now he's running the Canada Nudge Unit, actually. So here, laborers in India were given just envelopes to split out savings into different buckets, arbitrarily into 2 different envelopes. And this was done when they received their wages, etc. So in one version, they're just 2 plain envelopes. In another version, he put pictures of their kids on the envelopes. So they were now thinking about, okay, these savings are for my children, something like education, healthcare, food, clothing, whatever. And then they just see what happens to savings. This is interesting. They can open the envelopes anytime. They are sealed, but they have the envelopes. They can open them anytime. And you see a big difference in savings. So the blue bars are showing you what happens when there's envelopes versus no envelopes. And then the second set of bars is when there are kids' pictures versus not. Right? So you see that just the partitioning itself increases savings. And then if you put the kids' pictures on the envelopes, it increases savings even more. And this is a very, very simple little thing that has a big effect. This is, Ben was alluding to this a little bit. So we did this work in Belém, Costa Rica, in partnership with the World Bank. They wanted to save water. Right? Turned out that people didn't really know, first of all, if they were using too much or too little, and they didn't really know exactly how to save water. So we designed these stickers that just went on their water bill. And you got the happy water droplet if you were below median. Right? And there were 2 versions. In one case, we compared you to the entire town. In the other case, we compared you to your neighborhood. And if you were above median, then you got a sad water droplet. And the little bullet points that are hard to read on there are just simple tips for saving water. Take a shorter shower, or water your lawn less often, whatever. So 5.6% reduction when we compare you to your neighbors, your neighborhood. If we use the whole town, it's about half as much. Still works, but not as well. So it's interesting. You have to, when you do these social comparison things, it has to be peer group, like people that think are like them. This is a different intervention. On the right-hand side, this has specific ways of saving water, and we asked people to check off 1 or 2 that they would do. Right? So often what happens in these interventions when people try to do conservation things is you tell people to do 20 different things. If you tell people to do 20 different things, they'll do nothing. They go, well, which one do I start with? Do I have to do all 20? That seems like a lot. I'll start next month. That's a lot of work. It just gets procrastinated forever. You ask people to do one thing, start next week, becomes a habit, great, then move on to the next thing, and the next thing, much more straightforward. Another implication of this that's very unintuitive is we all like having choices. We live in New York. It's full of lots and lots of choices. Is that actually helpful? Turns out it's not so helpful. So this study was in a fancy supermarket out west. In one case, there were 24 jams available for tasting. In a variation, there were 6 jams available for tasting. And the researchers, again, there was an RA hiding somewhere, watching what people do. So first thing was, okay, how many people stopped to taste the jams? More people stopped when there are more jams. That makes sense, more attractive display. But then the real test was how many actually buy jam. Nobody buys jam when there are 24. And lots of people buy jam when there's 6. It's a 10x difference. And what the RAs reported, they were watching, as people were standing in front of the aisle trying to choose. When there were 24 jams, they would struggle, they would discuss with whoever they're shopping with, oh, which one do I like, lingonberry or boysenberry? And then they just give up and walk away. And when there were 6 jams, like, oh yeah, I like strawberry, just pick it up, walk right out. Very straightforward. So choice is not always a good thing. It gets people stuck. And this is because we don't like using our brains. Like ultimately, if something is hard to do, we avoid it. Right? So if the choice is going to take work, either because there are too many options, or the options are very similar, or there are too many attributes. I remember the last time anybody here tried to buy a camera or a new TV or the electronic device, they're crazy. You just start researching the options. Or even if you decide to change your phone from iPhone to something else or vice versa, it's a nightmare.
But you need a certain amount of choices.
Yeah, so you need a more limited number of
Limited.
choices.
Yeah. Because if you have no choice at all.
No, that's too extreme too.
Okay.
Yeah, so a limited number of choices, like 6, a handful of choices is fine. And you can also categorize choices. So if you do have 100 things you have to get people to choose from, you can kind of put it into a tree. So you can put the 100 things into 4 categories, ask people to choose 1 category, and then 5 more, and so on. And that helps. You have to help people choose somehow. The other thing you could do is if there are a lot of complex attributes, you can pick the attributes that are easiest to compare across everything. You can highlight those more. And then it's much easier for people to choose, so they don't have to figure it out. So often it's just in how you design the presentation of the choice. There are other things that happen that people will take shortcuts, like they'll pick the first option they see. They think it's the recommended or the standard options. You have to be careful when you order things on a menu of choices. Okay. Any other questions before I talk a little bit about the testing side of this? Okay, so this is going to be a very, very quick introduction to randomized controlled trials and why we need them. All right, so in a nutshell, the randomized controlled trial, you take your sample, you randomly put them into, say, 2 groups. In this case, one group receives whatever thing you're testing, the other group doesn't. Why do we have to do this? We think about design thinking and user testing and prototyping, if you guys have heard of that or do some of that. With physical products, that's often enough because the outcome you're looking for is, does the thing work? And can people figure out how to use it? Right? So you watch people using some piece of technology, that's sufficient. A lot of what we're doing, almost all of what we're doing, that is not the outcome. We're looking to change someone's behavior. We want somebody to go take all 3 vaccinations in a series. We want somebody to conserve energy. We want somebody to don't take up new technology for agriculture or whatever. You can't test that in a lab or in a room with a focus group because you can't see that behavior. At best, you can ask people, oh, do you like this program? Do you understand these materials? Right? And that's useful. You still do that, but then you have to go out and test it this way. So this is a case study example that I'll do quickly. So we were testing something called the financial health check. This is a short session that helps people hit their financial goals. And so if you come in and you say, I want to save more, we set you up with an automatic transfer from your checking to your savings account. If you want to pay down your debt, we set up an automatic transfer for that. Okay. So we were testing this with a large credit union. We could have done this as a user test, Well, let's get 30 people in, give this to them, look at before and after what happens. This is actually the data. So if you just look at people who took this service and I look at them before and after, it looks like, wow, this is working amazingly well. But what I don't know is, would these people have saved more on their own? Maybe, right? Maybe they were very motivated to save, and that's why they came and took the session in the first place. Like they're total financial geeks or whatever. So the only way I can test whether my health check is working and whether it's worth all the cost of delivering it is to randomize and then compare the control group to the treatment group. And it's still positive, but it's not as positive. It's very different. So in this case, the control group was not offered the test, but they expressed interest in it. Right? So we took people who expressed interest in the service and then split them up randomly. So that is why it's important to test like this. So it's often not possible to do a full RCT. There are various quasi-experimental methods that are not bad. They get you close. In the worst case scenario, you might be stuck doing a before and after if it's some policy that you can't offer just to a targeted group. And you do what you can in the real world, of course, but this is the ideal way of testing. And this is getting easier and easier with technology when there are digital delivery channels of any kinds, websites, mobile phones, text messages. There's software now that'll very quickly let you A/B test things. So that makes life easier. Any questions? As I went through that very quickly, it was probably confusing. But I'm hoping you guys have seen some versions of this before.
Just want to make clear that the concept of randomization is clear. Can you raise your hand when you're not 100% clear what a randomized control trial is? It's no problem. That's why we're here.
Yeah, it's to learn, right? So let's say I wanted to run a test here on something. What I would do is I would ask you guys to, I don't know, count off 1, 2, or something like that. Just slightly imperfect way of randomizing, but it would work, assuming that you all chose where to sit randomly. I could kind of create random groups that way. I then offer one half of the room, say the burrito, right? And I want to test like what's the effect of the burrito. And why does that tell me more than just giving it to a few people? If I have enough people in the room, then any kind of individual differences in tastes, digestion ability, whatnot, washes out. There's a similar mix of people on either side, of no matter what variable you can think of. Right? So that's why randomizing across a large enough group of people, all of these characteristics that might affect outcomes, get washed out. You have the same mix on either side, either sample.
And Piyush, a smaller version of that, we do every month, for example. We have an innovation newsletter that goes to about 1,200 people. And we split the recipient group in 2. And then we test every month a tweak, because the behavior we want to see is we want people to open the email and then click on the links and interact with our content. So in 1 month, we would send for one half of the group, for example, a different subject line, the traditional subject line compared to read our latest newsletter on policy innovation. And then we'll see which group opens it more often, and that will inform next month's choice for a subject line. And the same with the length of pictures, blurbs. So RCT is really a large-scale experiment where you have to look closely at the ethics. But in your everyday work, you can really start with A/B testing. And there are lots of middle grounds between.
The question, what is the control group in an A/B test? I know a little bit about A/B tests. So which is the control if you design 2 different?
In this case, for example, if I have my traditional subject line, Innovation Newsletter, volume 34,
Right.
I keep that. That's my control group. That's the status quo in the past, versus a new one.
I was just going to add on something, since we we kind of live in the world of RCTs in the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
They often talk about like the control is the standard of care. It's what's most ordinarily used. So in the world of medicine, it's perfectly translatable to people, is if you're always going to use penicillin in a trial for a new antibiotic, you're going to compare it because that's the standard of what you use, and whatever is new, you'll compare to that. And it's the same thing with people. Same description.
Okay, so what do we get when we put all of this stuff together with design thinking? You know, how does it relate to design thinking that some of you may be more familiar with? This is roughly how it fits. So this diagram in the middle is just, you know, one of the standard approaches from the Stanford Design School for design thinking. So you do some empathizing, qualitative research, etc. You define the problem, you ideate, you prototype it, user test it. Right? So here testing is not RCTs, that's user testing in design thinking. That's just bringing a few people into a room and seeing if they like the thing or they can use the thing. What we add on to this is at the beginning, we don't just rely on the qualitative research. We all still do all the qualitative research and observation, but we also draw insights from the behavioral science literature. But what do we know from lab studies? What do we know from other people's research in similar areas about how people behave in that situation? Then when we get to the ideation phase, we have a growing number of behavioral interventions and other interventions that people have tested elsewhere. So we can use that to seed our ideation for more ideas. Sometimes we can simply copy something or adapt something someone did. And then finally, after the prototyping and user testing, we experiment. So that's when we go out and do the RCTs to see if the thing's working. And if it's not working, we go back and iterate. Right? So this takes something that's a more creative process that's often an art and turns it into a combination of art and science. So it's not really a new approach in that sense, it's an evolution. It's taking human-centered design to the next level by inserting these new scientific or relatively new scientific fields that we now have. So the rest of this, I have a few examples. I want to do a time check. Should I keep going, skip ahead?
We are at time. We started late, but I'm always mindful of people's agendas, of course. I'd say maybe 2 examples, and then we wrap up.
Okay.
Thanks, Piyush.
Sure. So I'll do this one as it's fairly brief. So, it doesn't mean that if you're using science, all the creativity is gone and multidisciplinary perspectives are gone. You still need to be creative. So this example, these images you're seeing, this is work that we're doing in Madagascar with the government that has a conditional cash transfer program. But it's not that conditional, really. It's almost unconditional. So what we're trying to do is help people set goals for what they're going to do with that money, set aside some of it so then they actually are more likely to use it for things like education, improving nutrition for their family, etc. And we wanted to do these 2 interventions. One was we wanted to do this idea of self-affirmation, where you get people to think about something they've done that was successful or a time when they felt successful or competent. They tend to choose options that are more beneficial. They feel more confident that, yeah, I can actually manage to save this money and do something good for my family. And the other one was we wanted to get people to set very specific goals. So this idea of plan making, it's kind of sounds absurd, but if you ask people to be very specific about how they're going to do something. So for example, in voting, if you ask people, where are you going to be coming from to go vote? What time will you go? Who will you go with? That increases the number of people who vote because now you have the specific plan. So, okay, these are fairly standard things. We've done them lots of different places. We couldn't just copy in Madagascar because the literacy level is almost 0 in this population. So we had to figure out these interventions are normally in words. People write stuff. Okay, what do we do? So in the self-affirmation case, we had people draw. And they're very good at drawing in Madagascar. This was fascinating. So we had them draw the self-affirmation situation at a time when they were successful and something good happened. So we had to use creativity there. So, this was a combination of the scientific insight, recognizing this was a barrier, but then having to be creative on how we actually deliver the thing. And then similarly for the planning, we designed these little index cards with different goals on them that were also images, drawings, and people could choose an index card based on what goal they wanted to pick and the plans, etc. So we had to translate what we normally do in this very different way. And the results are not yet there, so I don't, where I think we might be midline. I don't know. The surveys are running. The data collection is running now, so we'll have results on this in a few months. This study, we do have results from. This was in South Africa. The goal was to reduce, ultimately prevalence of HIV, and specifically by reducing these intergenerational relationships. So young women sleeping with older men who have a much, much higher rate of HIV. So then the women end up contracting HIV. So what this chart is showing is just HIV prevalence by age. So the yellow line is women, the green line is men. But we look at this from a behavioral perspective, we realized that these women had the completely opposite perception. So they saw the young men being promiscuous today, so they thought, oh, they're high risk, right? And these older men had jobs, cars, they were well-dressed, they were more responsible. They thought, oh, those guys are probably safe. But they weren't thinking of, those guys used to be the young promiscuous guys, and they've been through that for many more years. So they now have a much, much higher rate of HIV. So that was the behavioral issue that we had to solve. We did that by designing this very, very simple game. And this came from the insight that you learn from repeated exposure. So this was a simple game where we just asked people, okay, which person is more likely to have HIV? Right? This example says a man who is 29 years old or a woman who is 25 years old. And you went through a few of these questions, and if you got them right, you got a little bit of money, and so on. And we compared this against a control where we just gave people information. We just told them, oh, these older men are riskier. So we see a big difference from this little repetitive game thing versus just giving people information. A lot more people answer correctly about older men being riskier. And our academic partners on the ground also went out and tested, I think 3 or 4 months later, and they found that the learning stuck. We did not have funding to go measure actual behavior change, so we don't know if this then led to fewer relationships. If we had had funding, we would have tracked that as well. So that's another example of a completely unintuitive intervention for something. You start with HIV here, and you wind up doing this little risk perception game. Okay, so to close out, I'll skip this example. So what do you need to do this? Right? You need the science, you need the testing capability, and then to make all that work, you need that R&D budget and that team. Technology companies, pharma companies, consumer goods companies have massive R&D budgets with huge departments of people and labs doing this. In the social sector, I've never found one anywhere. No government has one of these things, no large NGO, we've never seen it. The best thing, the closest thing to this we're seeing are these nudge units in some places now, or there's some innovation units in some cities that Bloomberg has funded. So it's in these very small ways, when your own innovation unit is basically this, but with probably a much, much smaller budget than you need to really do all of this across the board, across all the countries you guys work in. But most importantly, you need this. You need to be okay with failure, because iteration and testing means that those 5,126 designs didn't work before you found the design that makes you $5 billion. with Dyson vacuum cleaners. And this is really, really hard in organizations where failure means your career plateaus or is tanked. You know, when people say, let's do a pilot, somehow the implicit assumption is the pilot's going to be successful, which is exactly the opposite of what a pilot is. Right? If you're not failing a lot, you're not really innovating, because you're just doing stuff you already knew worked. You're not trying anything new. So I would argue that actually, if you want to measure how innovative you are, you should have some non-zero failure rate that you're trying to hit. So I will close with that and leave you with this page that you can use. And I'm happy to share these slides as well. But if you want more on this, there's more projects, descriptions, and publications on our website. But something I want to point to is bhub.org. There's something new that we've launched in partnership with everybody else in this field who's doing this work in the applying behavioral science, to make it easy for people to self-serve. So it has a database of behavioral innovations that we've curated that we feel you don't need a ton of expertise to copy. You could probably copy it yourself. And what we've done is we went to the research papers and extracted the actual design of the intervention. Whereas mostly the research papers focus on the theory and the regression tables, so they don't tell you what exactly was done. That's often glossed over. So we went and extracted that from the researchers. So it has that, and then it has a second half of the site that's a very simple checklist type framework designed for program elements. So there's one for written communication. So if you're writing a letter, sending an email, text, you can go through this checklist based on past behavioral research to optimize that thing. There's one for physical environment, there's one for process. And we'll keep adding content to this. So the whole community of behavioral science practitioners will hopefully keep adding content to it over time. So that should be a good resource going forward.
Do you use it as stimulus to help other people get more breakthrough ideas? Like you'll use those for people to react to and as they're doing any type of ideation work?
Oh, in the actual ideation, yeah. I mean, we'll use past things that were done as seed ideas. We do ideation a little bit differently because the latest research is saying that doing brainstorming in groups actually is less effective than doing it independently. So we do a combination where first people work independently, but then they present their ideas, because that sometimes seeds ideas for the rest of the group. But it's not this crazy free-for-all type brainstorming with Post-its. So that's the protocol we generally follow for ideation.
Well, let me first say thank you.
Thank you very much.
We are over time, so colleagues, if you have to leave, it's not going to be impolite if you stand up and leave. Otherwise, for those who want to stay, I'd say we take a number of questions. We do one round, and then we'll close it off. Who has questions? Hands up, please, so we get a sense of the temperature in the room. 4? All right, we take those 4. If you could introduce yourself, just with name and where you work, that'd be great. I'll start.
Thanks. My name's Doug Webb from HIV Health Group here. A lot of what we're doing is we're interested in changing individual behaviours en masse, yes, in terms of perceptions, behaviours, and treatment access, and so on. A lot of what we're doing is changing the conditions in which those people are making those decisions. So I'm interested in how do we apply these insights into not only individual behavioural change, but institutional behavioural change. And do you apply the same techniques, or do you have to use a different sort of look at particular decision makers and their influences at an aggregate level? Because a lot of our work is around in governance and institutions and changing conditions.
Yeah, I'm sighing because I get that question everywhere, and unfortunately the answer is not good, and that there isn't a ton of good empirical experimental science on changing organizational behavior. So what you speculated, just extrapolating what we know about individuals and trying to understand decision makers, context, and what might be biasing them, etc. That's the best we can do at the moment, unfortunately. Yeah.
Hi, Dan Sewald. I lead Pfizer's innovation and experimentation capability right down the block to our global headquarters. So it's great to be here. Thanks, Ben, for the invitation. It was a very intriguing presentation. Two quick thoughts. One is your question sparked a thought that our kind of mission is about changing organizations. It seems like it's very much related to change management as much as it is anything else, but that's very behaviorally driven, and it is very hard to shift culture. Speaking of which, at Pfizer, one of the biggest challenges that we've been leading an innovation change initiative for probably, I would say, half a dozen years. And we see changes, but one of the biggest challenges that we face is getting people to be more agile or nimble and embracing the idea of testing before they invest.
Right.
A lot of people will come up and say, I've got a big idea, I need $500,000. And usually, I know people say Pfizer, big checkbook, but they'll usually say, go to hell. We're not giving you that amount of money. So people will just say, well, it can't be done. And more and more, we've been shifting or trying to shift that mindset of quick, smart, nimble tests. But that seems to almost kind of struggle against the idea of randomized controlled trials, which are often thought of as very expensive. How do you reconcile doing nimble, fast tests and doing them in an RCT style?
So I think what's happened is because when people think RCT, they're thinking an academic RCT, or in your case, maybe people are thinking drug trial, which is, my God, huge nightmare. Academic RCTs are trying to measure many, many different outcomes that might be far in the future. So you have to do lots of surveys over years. That's what makes it expensive. When you're just trying to see if something works, you can just use administrative data. Data is already in the system, so it's very quick. It's much more like A/B testing a website or app than it is doing an academic RCT. Where you're trying to figure out, well, if I, improve health conditions, like what happens to lifetime and take up of education or finances, like various other things. So that's probably a misconception to fight. And or you can do an RCT very quickly. It doesn't have to be this crazy survey thing with huge samples. Yeah, because sometimes if you think the effect is going to be big of whatever you're doing, you don't need that big a sample.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm Samir from the UN Central Emergency Response Fund. It's a $450 million per year humanitarian grant fund, pooled fund from donors. We're trying to get people to be better applicants. You can imagine there's limited money, 20 billion plus in needs. The question is about when the incentives go against kind of the behavior you're trying to change. The incentive is to get money. So money's on the table. You're in South Sudan, there's an emergency, but everyone wants a piece of what we describe as jumpstart money. So we're trying to make small changes to application templates or give them tools to sit around and make decisions, but very often it's just a fight for money, and there's entitlements. The bigger agencies, World Food Program, UNICEF say, well, we're the big guys, we should be getting that money, where it's not always the case. So have you had any experience when there are competing or conflicting incentives and while trying to still change the behavior?
What's bad about the application? What would you have happen differently? You want to reduce the political argumentation and go more to content, sounds like.
We would like people to apply when needs assessments of the emergency show that food is a priority, health is a priority, but shelter is not the priority, or maybe there's an opportunity for other funding. I mean, UNDP is also running emergency projects, but maybe something less immediately needed at that time. But if you're sitting there and your boss says, go get me some money from this meeting, there's a fund. How do you tell or convince that person maybe they shouldn't be in it and work for the collective good instead of your own agency's interest, and it's kind of your job is to get money maybe?
I mean, these things are always hard to solve on the fly, but the one idea that's popping in my head is, if they were involved in the decision making themselves in some way, right, they would be on the other side of the table. So if they are making decisions, or let's say you had a group of folks who would otherwise be applicants, and maybe you have a rotating group or something like that, and those guys are, scoring these things. They may have a different attitude towards what a good application is and what's not, possibly. And they'll also feel like it's more fair, actually, because they'll be involved with it. So there's all this stuff on procedural justice, where people perceive something as unfair if they weren't involved in it.
Okay, thank you.
Another small thing you could try out. When the problem was that many small and medium-sized entrepreneurs filled out tax forms that were pretty inaccurate, they changed the form from on top signing that everything you're going to say from now on is accurate and true, compared to the form you sign at the end, and then do a thorough research. Those who had to sign at the beginning were much more accurate. So if you can somehow remind the representatives of agency what they signed up for in terms of larger values that are beyond their agency's mandate, maybe it could have an effect. It's just a wild guess, it has to be tested.
Yeah, or even if you could prime them at the beginning, let them know that if you have an application that doesn't have these things or is too focused on these things, these applications tend to be 80% less successful. So
Right.
That you're wasting your time if you're doing these things. But
And we had a last comment
Yeah.
question.
Comment and question. Yep. Yeah. My name is Patricia Leon Fedac from UNDP. I work in the Bureau of Management Services. My work has absolutely nothing to do with what the other gentleman said. I came because title is extremely attractive and very good, positive. The last slide that you showed caught my attention. You mentioned we need a cultural shift, tolerance to
Failure, yeah.
I think that's important. The most important is that, and I would call it more mental shift. And I think critical is to target schools, education, governments, in terms of teaching or proving our children that it's okay to fail. And I'm not sure if that is happening. My son, 6-year-old,
That's interesting.
he doesn't like to fail. He likes to bring 100% of his tests. I failed. Oh. And I checked his test and he made a mistake. And I said, thank God you failed this, because otherwise you would have never learned about what happened. Next time you will know about this situation. But we kind of like punish when you fail, so that means it's negative.
Yeah.
And the other cases that you show, or everybody what speaks here, is about people who are grown, about society who are already old. It's very difficult to change that mental attitude approach. So I think it's very important if this type of trend approach, it's also focused in schools, in the young generation to in the future, so this works in the future. So if you accept these failures, I don't know if your company targets government in terms of educating children and stuff.
Yeah, sometimes. And there's some of this going on even for a broader reason. So there's all this work on growth mindset versus fixed mindset by Carol Dweck and her colleagues. And the growth mindset is if you work hard, you can improve. The fixed mindset is, I was born dumb, I was born smart. And it turns out that a lot of kids from low-income backgrounds just assume they're never going to do well in school. But if you start telling them, oh no, if you just work hard, it's okay if you're failing, just keep working on it, they do much, much better. So it is starting to happen, at least in the US. Eventually, I think it'll spread elsewhere also. The other areas of deliberate practice, Anders Eriksson's great researcher who did all the work on that. I was just with him last week. The key thing about deliberate practice, so he studies experts like musicians, sportsmen, people like that. You have to pick something challenging enough so you are failing a little bit. Otherwise, you don't improve from the practice. If you're always getting 100%, then you're not going to improve your skill set. So yeah, your intuition is absolutely right on that.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Piyush, if you want to, now I'm going to We can do it bilaterally, sorry, but I'm mindful of the people's time. We said we would finish at 1:30. So sorry about this. We have 10 people online. Do you want to turn around and say hello to them?
Yeah.
We had 25 earlier. And
Okay, but they had to leave.
oh no, wait, you're still not looking at the camera. Oh, no, we are. All right, so thanks everyone here. Thanks everyone online. Thanks a lot, Piyush. We'll be in touch.